Stephen A. Smith. It's Scott Kaplan on 710 ESPN. Let me switch the subject on you real quick. The teams are showing up. Lakers are down at the bubble. Clippers are going to the bubble. Kawhi's not going to the bubble yet. Do this for me. Make the case, if I said to you the Lakers are going to win the West, make the case why the Lakers will win the West. What do you say, Stephen A.?
Listen, I think the Clippers are the most complete team. They have more depth. There's no question about it. I think collectively, defensively, they're better. I think their coaching is extraordinary. All of those things are true. But this is basketball, and I happen to believe when you have two of the top 5 players on the planet Earth, it's going to take everything you've got to knock them off. And I believe LeBron James and Anthony Davis to be those two dudes. That's not to say that the Clippers won't beat them or that they can't beat them. I'm just simply saying that if I'm betting my money on something, I'm betting my money on two of the top 5 players in the world because two of the 3 best players on the court are LeBron James and Anthony Davis, with Kawhi Leonard obviously being that other guy. Now, Paul George is a star, make no mistake, but I think that his injuries, the inconsistency and the infrequency with which he's played and with which they've played with one another, combined with this 4-month layoff, I think severely hampers their chances of capturing the championship this particular year because I think to some degree they've been compromised. That's not to say the same can't be true of the Los Angeles Lakers, but I'm betting on LeBron's 17 years of experience, his 9 trips to the NBA Finals, the fact that in his 17th year in the NBA, he's still arguably the best player on the planet. And I'm looking at a guy in Anthony Davis that walks around averaging 26 and 9 and could easily be voted the NBA's Defensive Player of the Year. Avery Bradley is a loss because of his on-ball defensive prowess, but the combination of Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Alex Caruso, and now J.R. Smith, I think makes up for a guy that was averaging 8 points a game, in my personal opinion. And so because of that, when I look at the Kuzmas of the world and I look at KCP and others, I think that the Lakers, ultimately, it comes down to 2 against 1. LeBron James and Anthony Davis versus Kawhi Leonard, with Paul George on the outside looking in terms of being the top 4 player on the court. And that's how I view it, and that's why I would give the Lakers the favorite, although I totally understand anybody who picks the Clippers because it's pretty damn hard to bet against them.
Stephen A. Smith on Scott Kaplan on 710 ESPN. Any concern at all, and maybe you know something, but Kawhi Leonard, when I hear this Family Matters, I get concerned because of the world that we're living in right now, and I see a bunch of baseball players not show up, and people say we can't tell you anything. Any concern at all about Kawhi?
There's no, of course there's concern. When they won the championship last year, he only played 60 games. Now, to his credit, he didn't miss playoff games, and he averaged 39 minutes per game in the postseason. So we have to pay attention to that. We also have to pay attention to the fact that since the games are going to be in the bubble, there's absolutely no travel whatsoever, which can also be taxing on the body, and we can't ignore the possibility of that. So we got to give credit where credit is due in that regard and understand that if anybody can work around these conditions, it would be Kawhi Leonard. But the flip side to it is that in the end, still in all, when you hear that he hasn't traveled with the team, it was an excused absence, family reasons, you can't help but lean towards injury because that's been the case with Kawhi Leonard the last 3 years. And that's what this comes down to. Not just his last year in San Antonio, not just during the regular season last year with Toronto, but also this season with the Clippers. So all those things taken into consideration, you need to be concerned. But again, we simply don't know.
Stephen A. Smith on Scott Kaplan on 710 ESPN. I was telling everybody earlier that in 2011, when Kawhi Leonard was playing college basketball down at San Diego State, I had no sense that he could ever become the player that he has become. But I can remember a long time ago, like right before LeBron James was getting ready to come into the NBA, you and I being on air together and you telling me LeBron James will come into the NBA as a kid out of high school and will immediately be a top 5 player in the NBA. You knew the story. I was like, really, Stephen A? This kid in high school is going to become a top 5 player the day he walks in the league? Dude, that was 17 years ago. Stephen A., you couldn't have been more right, and I just have to admit at some point that I'm not quite the talent evaluator that I think I am.
Well, I just think that, when you looked at LeBron James coming out of high school, he already had an NBA body. He was a kid, but he looked like a grown man. He wasn't quite the 250, 260 that he is now, but he was at least 225 or so. He was 6'9" with a handle. He had an aerial assault to his game, and he could pass beautifully, and his basketball IQ was off the charts. So you knew that just by watching him play, even as a prep player. And so to come on the NBA level and to have those kind of expectations, listen, I can be critical of LeBron James, wetting the bed in key moments in the fourth quarter of NBA Finals like he did against Dallas. I could be critical of his sporadic free throw shooting, no question about it, or his playing around all of those initial years in Cleveland where he was so busy having fun that, he should have held more guys accountable so they could perform at a peak level when you were chasing championships earlier on in your career. But there is no doubt that in my estimation he belongs in the Mount Rushmore of basketball, that he's one of the top 3 players in the history of the game, that he's a 3-time champion, he's a 4-time league MVP. And the 2 greatest attributes about him are this. A, in 17 years, the only thing we could say about his character was, quote, unquote, the decision, how he handled departing from Cleveland to Miami. Mm-hmm. There's absolutely positively nothing else that we could say about his character as a young man. He has been the quintessential role model, the closest thing to perfection as an iconic sports, brand that we may have ever seen. And we have to give credit where credit is in regards to that. And number 2, at no time in 17 years did we ever look at LeBron James and say, he's out of shape, he's not ready. The closest we ever came to that, Scott, was when he went on that, paleo diet or something like that, and he had lost too much weight, and he needed to take some time off to go to go on the road and go away. I think he was back in Cleveland, and then he went to Miami for like a week or 2 during the middle of the season to sort of get himself together. That's the closest thing, and that wasn't for laziness. It wasn't for a dereliction of duty or anything like that. He tried a diet in order to get himself sharp, and the diet weakened him and didn't have him at full strength. So as a result, it drained him to some degree, and it compromised his greatness at that particular moment in time. But again, it wasn't intentional. He actually was trying to do something to get himself in even better condition, and it just didn't work. So to me, when you are a superstar of that magnitude and you are that great, and we're able to look at you and to say, A, your character has been sublime, and B, you never cheated us in terms of your preparation because you were always ready to go. You just can't say enough about them. All of these things, to me, get attributed to you as a great, great athlete and a great, great talent. And I've often said this. You know what? It's my job to go on the air and to try to be as objective as I possibly can be and all of this other stuff. But I truly, truly know and appreciate his greatness, and we will all miss him when he's gone.
Stephen A. Smith, well said about LeBron James, and I'll add this just to close, which is my respect for him is this. Dude, he's got courage and isn't afraid to actually take a side. We all watched that Jordan documentary, and everybody knows that Michael didn't want to ever, butt his nose into anything. He was busy playing and then gambling and golfing and doing his thing. But LeBron James has strong opinions and is I would say, courageous enough to share them in a world where you get crushed by 50% of the people, no matter what your opinions are. Mm-hmm. And I respect that part of his game too, dude.
Well, that's you. You and I slightly differ on that. I'm not saying that LeBron James doesn't deserve the credit, but I think Jordan is victimized too much by what he didn't do. Now, we have to understand something. Who knows what Jordan would have been if he had Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all of these things at his disposal where he could disseminate a message to tens of millions of people by simply typing up something, pressing send, and then going on his merry way. We don't know that. With Jordan, in order for him to speak, there was no social media. So he had to do interviews. He had to get in front of the microphone, particularly at that moment in time, et cetera, in order for his message and the true intent of his words to be disseminated. Plus, he had to take into account the times that we were living in. Certainly, it wasn't civil rights, But understand, during the civil rights era, as hard as it was, what people, I believe, don't appreciate, Scott, is that it was actually easier in certain terms back in those days, because the transgressions, the iniquities exacted against the African American and other disenfranchised communities throughout this nation was so flagrant that you had no choice in most instances. You had absolutely no choice. They disguised it a lot better in the 80s, especially leading into the 90s. And as a result, he was going to be that first dude outside of Magic Johnson that really, really went mainstream. But Magic Johnson went mainstream and signed a 25-year, $25 million contract. Jordan was making about $100 million off the court. So you got all of that going on, and they're telling you, excuse me, this is what you can do. You can ultimately become an owner. You can ultimately have your own brand that's worth $8 billion for Nike. Instead of just talking about the transgressions that exist in our society, you can make inroads to changing that by being empowered with ownership, having the ability to hire and employ black folks all over the place. There was a different agenda, and I think that Jordan doesn't get nearly as much credit as he deserves for what he's done for the African American community by virtue of his greatness, his intellect, and his willingness to go for what he went for. Without him, without Magic and guys like that, there would not have been a Kobe. There would not have been a LeBron. So that's how I look at it. It's not to say that they don't deserve credit, but oftentimes we look and we piggyback off of that to look at somebody like Jordan and say, well, he could have done more. I believe he could have done more as well. I believe if it were me, I would have done more because I would have spoken out more. But he had a grander plan. And when we see what he's accomplished in the end, owning an NBA team, the $8 billion Nike brand, and the multitude of black people he has employed, and sort of paving the way for Madison Avenue in corporate America to further embrace black folks in the fashion that they did so the LeBrons and others could be created. There's something to be said for that as well. And Jordan deserves credit for that. He really does.